Radio in America in the 1980s wasn't background noise. It was the soundtrack to everything. Every car ride, every bedroom, every kitchen. The voices, the hits, the static between stations. It was how you found out what was happening, what was cool, what everyone else was listening to. Radio wasn't competing with streaming services or podcasts. It was the only game in town. The 1980s were peak radio. FM had finally won the battle for music. AM was transforming into talk and sports. Personalities like Casey Kasem could reach millions of people at the same exact moment every Sunday. Local DJ became celebrities. Stations had identities. And if you wanted to hear new music, you had one option: turn on the radio and wait. This was before algorithms, before skipping songs, before knowing what was coming next. Radio was unpredictable, communal, and alive. If you are someone who values understanding how culture shapes generations, you will want to subscribe to follow along for more stories like this. Now, let's walk through what listening to the radio was actually like in America in the 1980s. First, let's talk about the technology that made radio in the 1980s sound the way it did. By 1980, FM had basically won. Almost everyone was listening to music on FM instead of AM. The difference was dramatic. FM gave you stereo and clarity and no static from electrical interference. When you turned on an FM station, the music sounded clean. Bass was fuller. Highs were crisp. AM could not compete. AM signals traveled farther, especially at night. A powerful AM station in Chicago, like WLS, could reach listeners hundreds of miles away in Nebraska or Kentucky. The signal would bounce off the atmosphere after sunset. You could pick up distant stations on clear nights and hear DJs from cities you had never been to. But for music, AM sounded thin, mono, and fuzzy. By the mid-1980s, AM had mostly given up on music and pivoted to talk radio, sports, and news. The listening devices mattered just as much as the signal. The Sony Walkman had arrived in the early 1980s, and it changed everything. For the first time, you could walk around with headphones, listening to FM radio and stereo, completely portable. You would clip the Walkman to your belt, run the headphone cord under your shirt, and suddenly you had a private soundtrack to your day. Then there was the boombox, big, loud, battery-powered stereos with handles. You would carry one to the park, to the beach, to the street corner. The boombox was not private, it was a public announcement. In cities, boomboxes became central to early hip-hop culture. Breakdancers would set one down on cardboard and let it blast. Car stereos became listening rooms. People spent hours commuting, and the car radio was their companion. Digital tuners replaced the old sliding needle, so you could lock onto a frequency precisely. You would program your favorite stations into preset buttons. The car became the most important place people listened to radio, which is why morning and afternoon drive time became the most valuable hours for advertisers. Now let's talk about what you actually heard when you turned on the radio. The 1980s were the era of format fragmentation. Stations did not try to play everything anymore, they specialized. If you wanted top 40 pop hits, you tuned to a CHR station, contemporary hit radio. If you wanted soft rock for the office, you went to adult contemporary. If you were into hard rock, you found an AOR station, album-oriented rock. CHR stations played tight playlists, maybe 20 to 30 songs in heavy rotation. You would hear the same hits over and over, artists like Michael Jackson, Madonna, Prince, and Duran Duran. The repetition was the point. It drilled songs into your brain. MTV and CHR radio fed off each other. A video would blow up on MTV and suddenly every CHR station in the country was playing that song every hour. Adult contemporary stations targeted older listeners, baby boomers who did not want aggressive guitars or synthesizers. Soft rock and pop ballads, safe for the office. Artists like Phil Collins, Lionel Richie, and Whitney Houston. The music was polished, melodic, and inoffensive. Rock radio was splitting into different camps. Traditional album-oriented rock stations played deep cuts from bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. But a new format was emerging: classic rock. In 1986, stations started playing exclusively hits from the 1960s and the 1970s. Artists like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Who. Meanwhile, alternative rock was brewing on stations like KROQ in Los Angeles, which played new wave, punk, and bands that would never make it onto mainstream CHR like Depeche Mode, The Cure, and U2 before they were huge. Heavy metal got its own dedicated stations. KNAC in Long Beach, California went all metal in 1986. They played Slayer, Metallica, and other bands that other stations would not touch. Metal fans treated KNAC like a religion. People would record hours of broadcasts onto cassette tapes and mail them to friends across the country who did not have access to metal radio. Then there were the personalities. Radio in the 1980s was not just about music. It was about the voices between the songs. DJs were characters, celebrities, companions. The biggest was Casey Kasem. Every Sunday, American Top 40 aired on over 500 stations. Millions of people listened to the same countdown at the same time. Casey would tease the top songs, tell stories about the artists, read letters from listeners. The long-distance dedications were the emotional heart of the show. Someone stationed overseas in the military would write in, ask Casey to dedicate a song to their girlfriend back home, and Casey would read it on the air with perfect sincerity. It made radio feel personal and massive at the same time. The morning zoo format exploded in the 1980s. Instead of one DJ playing music, you would get a whole crew doing comedy bits, prank calls, sound effects, and banter. Scott Shannon's Z Morning Zoo in New York became legendary. They presented themselves as regular people goofing off, broadcasting from a shack in the swamps of Secaucus. The energy was chaotic, irreverent, the opposite of the polished professionalism of the 1970s. In Chicago, WLS was an institution. Larry Lujak's Animal Stories segment became famous. He would read bizarre news stories about animals in a completely deadpan voice. WLS reached across the entire Midwest at night. For people in rural areas, WLS was their main source of music discovery. Radio contests were huge events. Stations would give away cars, cash, even houses. You would have to be the 10th caller, or identify a mystery sound, or listen for a specific cue. Contests created appointment listening. People would sit by the phone for hours, waiting for the moment to call in. Winning felt like a lottery, but it made radio interactive. You were not just passively listening, you were participating. Request and dedication shows were everywhere. Local DJs would take calls from listeners who wanted to dedicate songs to friends, boyfriends, girlfriends. You would call in, wait on hold, get on the air for 10 seconds, shout out to your high school, request a song. Hearing your name on the radio felt huge. Then there was the ritual of taping songs off the radio. If you wanted to own a song but could not afford to buy the single or album, you would record it off the radio onto a cassette tape. You would sit there with your finger hovering over the record and pause buttons, waiting for your favorite song to come on. When it finally did, you would hit record and pray the DJ did not talk over the intro. DJs always talked up to the post. speaking over the instrumental intro right up until the vocals started. It was a skill for them. For you, it was infuriating. Still, mixtapes made from radio recordings were everywhere. You would spend hours curating the perfect mix. The tape would have snippets of DJ banter, commercials, station jingles. Those accidental captures are what make old mixtapes feel so authentic now. They are time capsules. For people who lived through radio in the 1980s, the memories are vivid. Waking up to a clock radio with glowing red numbers, the DJ's voice cutting through the music to give the time and temperature. Driving at night and scanning the dial, picking up distant AM stations. Sitting in your bedroom with a transistor radio under your pillow, listening after your parents thought you were asleep. The anticipation of waiting for a countdown show to reveal the #1 song. Radio in the 1980s was the last time an entire country was tuned to the same frequency. It was a shared experience. If a song was #1, everyone knew it. If a DJ said something controversial, everyone heard it. There was no algorithm tailoring content to your taste. You got what the station played, and you either liked it or changed the dial. The 1980s were radio's peak, right before everything fragmented. Before CD offered better sound quality. Before the internet let you hear anything, anytime. Before streaming made radio feel obsolete. For one last decade, radio was the center of American culture. The voices, the music, the static, the ritual of tuning in, it defined how people experienced sound, discovered music, and felt connected to something bigger than themselves.